welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Kelsey. I'm the creator of Bite-Size Ancient History and a recent graduate of Cambridge University. This video is part of a series where I've been talking about your favourite historical films and TV shows and telling you what is truth and what is purely fiction. So if this sounds like something you might be interested in, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so that you don't miss out on anything. Generally, if you're interested in some fun historical content, don't forget to check out my other socials as well. Today we're going to be talking about an episode of The Simpsons called I, CARUMBUS in season 32, episode 2. And I'm just going to say now, I am a big fan of The Simpsons. Like, it's just one of those programs I've always watched since I was really young and tiny, and generally I'm pretty impressed with how this episode turned out. I think The Simpsons are very good at taking these niche topics like ancient Rome and laying down little Easter eggs for historians like myself to find and be very happy with. Of course, the actual narrative itself is never accurate, but it's these little teasers to the historical reality which are really fun and interesting, so I'm going to be talking about some of them today. So without further ado, let's get into it. The episode starts with the Simpsons family going on a museum trip, and they have a special exhibition about ancient Rome, and the kind of tagline that describes this is blood, honour and vases. And honestly, not a bad description of ancient Rome, and kind of something that you would see in a museum display, so can't be angry about that. There was a lot of wars, there was a lot of blood. Main thing was about Rome's honour and virtues, and inevitably a lot of vases, as we see in the episode. Then, in a geeky way, one of my favourite lines comes towards the start of the episode when they're in the museum and Lisa is looking at these columns and she says, "Oh my god, that's so Ionic." And it's such a stupid art history classics pun, but I love it. So if you don't know anything about columns, I'll give a little brief description now. So there are three main classes when it comes to ancient columns, and this is Doric, our most simple ones, Ionic, where there's a slight kind of curl at the top, and Corinthian, which are our most floral and decorative varieties. And accurately in this episode, these are Ionic columns. So it's a great pun, Ionic, iconic. It is iconic, I'm here for it. Generally, their depiction of a lot of the artifacts in the museum are pretty accurate. We see the Roman standard, and that's exactly what it looked like. We see the togas that the different people in statues are wearing are pretty accurate. We see water jugs, we see this kind of snake bracelet, and they're all very real artifacts from ancient Rome, so a big tick for The Simpsons there. The only thing that is slightly off is that we see one of the statues in this pose where their arm is slightly lower than what we would usually see with a leader, where it's this ad locutio pose which is raised. But they kind of do it for the purpose of a joke because Homer then uses it as a back scratch. So generally, the only time we see them bend the historical truth is to serve a comedic purpose, and that is completely justified. I'm never going to critique that because it's what makes it interesting and funny. Once in the museum, Homer and Marge start arguing about the fact that there is a kind of meeting, presentation at Homer's workplace, and he's not going because he doesn't care, and Marge wants him to aspire to be better in his workplace and not just continue to have an entry-level job for the rest of his life. And this is when the curator steps in and says that this theme of aspiration is a reoccurring idea throughout history, from modern day all the way into ancient Rome. So he starts to tell them about this very real Roman family that he is studying and curated at the museum as a kind of comparison between their two arguments. And the leader of this family that we start to talk about is called Obesius the Wide. So, obviously, it doesn't take many brain cells to guess that that was not a real Roman figure. Obviously, they've made it sound like a Roman name because they've got that ending of us, which we attach basically to anything to make it sound like a Roman man. Despite this figure itself not being real, the kind of narrative that precedes it is pretty accurate. So Obesius is shown to have grown up in a very poor family working on a farm, and we're told that they can't afford an ox, so he is ploughing the fields himself, and that's how we get this buff, younger version of Homer. Eventually, Abe, his grandfather, can afford an ox, and kind of affords this by selling Homer into slavery. And this was a very real thing that happened during the Roman Empire. It was not uncommon for poor families to start selling their children into slavery when they could no longer afford to look after them. As he says goodbye to him, he says arrivederci, and obviously this is Italian for goodbye. So I mean, it wouldn't be what they would say in ancient Rome, but we get the connection, fair enough. Once he's sold into slavery, he's put into a slave cart with his friends from the normal Simpsons episodes like Lenny, Carl and Mo. They are then packed up and sent off to Rome. And we see them trundling through the Roman streets. This is again where there's quite a few cool Easter eggs. So we see them go past a milestone, and this is what the Roman milestones used to look like, and it's inscribed with the title Roma, which is Latin for Rome. And that's a really cool side note, is that they do so much real Latin in this episode. It's beautiful. They didn't need to, and they did, and that's what we respect. And you just don't see it in the bigger budget Hollywood films, and it shows how easy it is to do it. But anyway, that's another rant to compare them all. That's why I think this might be the most accurate and one of the best things that I have reviewed on this channel, which is so unexpected. The curator, as he's describing their journey, also says how there's many large pornographic graffiti images in Rome, and this is very true. As much as I would like to show them, I do not think I can without getting demonetized, but they are very real. Feel free to look it up of your own accord if you're over a certain age. They are just line drawings though, like it's not like heavy graffiti, it's just like a stick figure. But yeah, I'll leave that to you. At the end of their journey, they finally reach the Colosseum, and this is a pretty accurate cartoon drawing of the Colosseum. What you may think is peculiar is that we see statues in kind of archways on the outside, but this isn't inaccurate. While there are no statues today, generally historians believe that there were during the period of ancient Rome. And this is because we see a lot of coinage from emperors like Tiberius, where there is a hint towards these statues, and they were of the Roman gods and goddesses. So big thumbs up. Shows pretty good research there. Obviously, once we get to the Colosseum, we're told that these slaves are now going to be gladiators. And if you've seen my video on the film Gladiator and on Pompeii, if you haven't, go check them out, you will know that slaves becoming gladiators are very real. I think another kind of ode to the film Gladiator as well is the first person he fights is the character called Wolfus Rey, and we're told that he is from Germania. So this was a very real ancient Roman province, and also the one mentioned in the film Gladiator. Homer, or Obesius the Wide, is successful in this first battle in a very gruesome way, and he kind of tackles him like an ox. It's pretty grim, pretty funny. And this is when, I think he's called Luigi, the Italian chef, makes a comment by saying how horrific it is to witness. He says, Juno, mother of Apollo. That is not correct, because Apollo's mother was Leto. Juno is typically the wife of Jupiter, and he obviously has an affair with Leto, and this is how we get Apollo. So I don't really know what happened there, but yeah. Also, for any Simpsons fans, there's a really funny pun because he's acting as an ox and plows his victim, and they refer to him as Mr. Plow, so that's obviously a reference to one of the much older episodes back in the day where he has a snowplow machine, a snowplow, and I thought that was quite funny. We then see Fat Tony, the kind of higher up slave owner, deciding whether he's going to live or survive, and again, as I mentioned in my Gladiator and Pompeii videos, this is exactly how it would work. Whoever was kind of the most higher position when watching these games would be in charge of these decisions. They'd often listen to the public opinion, but it was ultimately down to them if they would feed them to the animals or have them just killed. Up to them. And again, the popularity that we see Obesius gain is a very real idea. Again, the example I use every time is the fact that women were a big fan of these gladiators, to the point that you could actually buy gladiator perfume, which was the gladiator's sweat. Yeah, pretty grim. In this popularity, this is where he meets Marge, or as they call her, Majora. pretty real Latin name as well. We also see his friendship with the other slaves continue to grow, and we see Barney writing the graffiti Semper Fratres. And again, this is real Latin, and it means always brothers, and then this refers to the fact that they talk about how if one of them ever gets freed from being a slave, they're going to help the rest of them out. So a little bit of time passes and we see them training at Gladiator school. While it wasn't quite as balletic as we see Obesius running the class, again, gladiator schools were a very real thing because it obviously meant that you got the best entertainment out of each show. Majora and Fat Tony, I can't remember what they actually call his character in it, but he is Fat Tony. Comes in because Majora has gotten pregnant by one of the gladiators and he doesn't know who. We obviously know it is Obesius, but they all stand forward in this kind of Spartacus way and say, I have Sexicus, I have Sexicus, I have Sexicus, and so on. I'm Spartacus, no, I'm Spartacus. And obviously that's a clever nod to the film Spartacus, which was based on the very real revolt under Spartacus, who himself was a slave and a gladiator. So very good reference, 10 out of 10. Once Obesius admits to it, he marries Majora, and by Fat Tony he is gifted a very nice villa as part of their family and slaves, which happen to just be his friends. So initially he is going to free them, but then Majora steps in and says, are you sure you actually want to do that? And she starts to manipulate him very much from behind the scenes, and she gives a little mini speech about the fact that she realises that's the only thing women can do. And this is really accurate to ancient Roman society. Women didn't have a lot of freedom and they weren't really viewed as citizens, so they had to do as much as they can from behind the scenes, and a lot of the time they did. One of the key examples of this would be the elite Roman family with Nero's mother Agrippina, who very much controlled Nero from his birth to her death in manipulating him as emperor. And it's just something that you don't see formally, but we knew was happening. So that's pretty accurate and really good. We then skip 10 years later and we see the Roman numeral of the X to show this, and correct Roman numeral, very good. We also see now a giant statue outside the Colosseum of the mayor of Springfield within this ancient Roman context, and this is based off the Colossus of Nero, which would have been outside the Colosseum, so this is very accurate. However, weirdly, we also have the Arch of Constantine, and that wouldn't have been present there until much later than Nero, and we're kind of guessing that it's based on that timeline. It's hard to say because obviously he isn't actually Nero, but it is him in the statue being Nero. Do you know what I mean? So kind of wrong, kind of right. Obesius has taken over the family business, which is basically a laundrette. And we see this being advertised with a mosaic depiction. This is exactly how Roman tabernae, or taberna singular, would have advertised what they were, because obviously as trading ports and stuff they would have lots of different foreign visitors who might not necessarily be fluent in Latin. So they would communicate what they are purely through a mosaic depiction. We're also told, as a side fact, that they use urine to clean the clothes, and unfortunately this is very accurate. The ammonia within urine kind of has these bleaching qualities, so it was used to clean clothes. I probably wouldn't do it. They obviously come to the realisation that there's only so much that the workers themselves can produce. So they start putting pots outside kind of taverns and populated areas to get free samples to clean these clothes. And this was a very real thing that happened in ancient Rome, so that's great as well. With this discovery and this idea, which isn't actually Obesius's, it's Lenny's idea, I'm pretty sure, Lenny and Carl, they start to go up in the world, they start making a lot more money, and we have a full song in Latin, which, as a nerd, very exciting, and I love that it's real Latin. So as a rough translation, the song states, we are moving up from the Subura, and this was a very poor, dense area in the city of Rome, so it makes sense that we're moving away from this because now they're being richer, moving up in the world, to the best Palatine villa, and this is one of the areas where the rich elite would live. The song then adds, we also drink strong white wine. So yeah, they're having parties, they're having a great time. We see the villa and it has this triclinium that Obesius is lying on, and that was a very real piece of ancient Roman furniture, and it is where you would recline and you would just relax, and also where you'd sit during parties so you could eat and drink. And then we also have this pool in the middle of the room, and this is a pretty accurate villa layout for Rome. We then see the family go to a sacrifice to celebrate the harvest. And as we're entering, we see Bart or Bartigula writing Il Barticus, and I think that's a very good reference from the translation of El Barto into the Latin context, Il Barticus, meaning the Bart. This idea of sacrificing animals like sheep, unfortunately, very real. We did have harvest kind of festivals like this where you'd sacrifice sheep, ox, and so on. It is here that they realise they're still below the senator class, and senators, very real in ancient Rome, they were kind of your politicians. So Marge, or Majora, devises the plan that she wants Obesius to become a senator so that they can continue to progress in the world. He's like, okay, right. So he goes to the Senate and is laughed out of it because they're like, why would we have a senator who collects urine and uses it to clean our clothes? In this transition, it's described as marching down the Appian Way, very real Roman road, so another good reference. We also see all the senators wearing purple-coloured togas, and this is what they would have worn. The current emperor is also shown to have his horse as a member of the Senate, and I'm so excited to tell you that this is kind of based on a fact. So the real emperor, Caligula, made his horse Incitatus a senator, supposedly. This is written in later accounts like Suetonius, so it may be an example of political propaganda to slander earlier rulers. But still, it's grounded in historical writings. Once being rejected, Homer encounters Burns, who informs him that he's next in line to the throne, having been politically adopted. And this is something that a lot of the emperors would do. If they didn't have their own children or didn't believe in the skills of their own children, it was very common to basically adopt somebody else so that they would take over. Burns asks Obesius that he kill the current empress so that he can take over, and in response, or in like a trade, he will be made a senator, so he gets what he wants, and he agrees to this. So Obesius goes to confront the emperor in a room called the Vomitorium, and you can kind of guess what they depicted that as from the word vomit, orium. However, this is a misinterpretation. These were actually rooms that were often the sides of stadiums, like the Colosseum itself, and it was just for people to easily and quickly exit the building. So the word vomit actually comes from expel, so it's more the expelling of humans than ugh. But it's a fair interpretation because it's a common misinterpretation. As he's being stabbed to death, he says, et tu pigae, and this is obviously a reference to Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, where we hear et tu Brute, and you Brutus, who is killing Caesar. Spoilers? I mean, it's not really, it's a historical event. If you didn't know that Brutus killed Caesar, I don't know what to say. Another 10 years passes, we get another X, and he has grown in power even more, and also in size. He is a lot bigger. And this could just be like the kind of Simpsons humour because Homer is a larger person and he's called Obesius. But it could also be a reference to the fact that Nero, the longer he is in power, the bigger he gets. And I will show you a picture of coins here because it's quite funny to see how drastically it changes from healthy, fit man to quite big. As a family, they're hosting a Saturnalia party, and this was a very real Roman event, and this is what came before Christmas, so it would actually be celebrated on the 24th of December, and with the rise of Christianity, that's when we see it being replaced. This is when we meet the children who have started to grow up, so Lisa and Bart, or Bartigula, which is obviously inspired from the name of the real Roman emperor, Caligula. Bartigula is described as beating up Ptolemaic book guy. Ptolemy was a real philosopher, and this is when he has a philosophical quote of when he was being beat up. So another very great niche reference. However, the new emperor did not come to Majora's party, so she's not happy and basically tells Obesius He's got to stab another emperor because we want to keep going up in the world. He says no, he doesn't want to do it. However, the next day, I think they're in the Colosseum watching something, she has poisoned his drink. However, he has his assistant, which is Smithers, drink it so he dies, but then is crushed by a capital column. In this, Majora does a speech that starts with friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears, again like Mark Antony's speech in Shakespeare, and she announces that she is nominating Bartigula, her son, to be the new emperor, so something she didn't tell her husband Obesius. We then receive a brief summary of what life is like under Bartigula as emperor. We're told that he declares war on Neptune, and very excited again to tell you this was a real thing that the Emperor Caligula did. Which links into another real fact that they comment on, is the fact that Bartigula probably has syphilis. And in reflection, a lot of historians believe that he did, and that's what caused his crazy episodes like making his horse a senator and declaring war on the sea. As he continues to grow very prideful and hurting all of the people around him, Obesius is not happy and declares how he is not a god, because Caligula and Bartigula both believed them to be a god. And he denounces him of this, and they have a fight in the Colosseum where unfortunately they both die, and having witnessed this, Majora also kills herself, so we're just left with Lisa, who's like, you forgot I existed. Yeah. And that is the end of the narrative. Then we go back into the museum and we realise the family has learnt nothing through this comparison anyway. Which is kind of the bane of a historian's life, as you see things repeating itself and nobody learning, but hey, it's okay. And that is everything. So if you liked that, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more, and to check out my other social media channels for other fun historical content. I'll see you next week. Bye!